Rubble is scattered everywhere. Unfortunately, a woman's leg is trapped underneath, causing her intense pain, and her body trembles. She tries desperately to free herself but finds no way out. Realizing the futility, tears stream down her face. She lies back, powerless, accepting her fate, unable even to move a muscle. That's when a young boy arrives, shouting her name. Mina! He rushes to move the rubble, and she gazes at him with weary eyes. He is relentless in his efforts to help her, so much that his hands begin to bleed. He just wants the debris to move, he cannot bear the thought of losing her. She tells him to leave her to die alone. Upon hearing this, he freezes, shocked. She looks at him, slowly losing consciousness, and urges him to get out. She insists that, though she can't escape, he should at least hurry and save himself. But how could he? How could he just leave her like this? She tells him there's no hope of escape. She notices he's exhausted and struggling to stay alert. He'll be in danger if he remains. Suddenly, a strange noise catches her attention. She realizes something is falling from the sky. She calls out, "Mr. Yanji, it's dangerous!" Then, a giant boulder falls on them, shocking everyone on the set. Panic spreads as crew members shout for help, believing they may be trapped under the rubble. The director urgently orders the crew to check on the actors, but bystanders question if there is even space to avoid such a large boulder on the set. To make matters worse, the possibility of moving it seems unlikely. Amid the chaos, a man rushes forward, desperately hoping they are alive. Then, a hand breaks through the rubble. He reassures them they're safe. The man asks, "Jaiwan, are you all right?" But she seems shaken. She thanks him for saving her, asking if he's okay as well. He smiles, assuring her he's fine. Meanwhile, the director criticizes a crew member, demanding to know how the set was constructed and whether it was properly inspected before they began shooting. The crew member, pale-faced, insists he secured the area beforehand and checked thoroughly. But the director dismisses his response, blaming him for nearly causing harm to two of his valuable actors. Lee, however, tries to calm the director down, explaining that it wasn't real concrete. The important thing is that everyone is safe. Even though it was just a prop, it was still heavy. The girl whose heart almost dropped earlier wonders aloud about what could have happened. She's just relieved everyone is okay, though she admits she was a bit shaken. Jaiwan comments that Lee's hand was wrapped protectively around her during the incident. She remarks that despite his young age, Lee has everything. He's kind, handsome, and possesses exceptional acting skills. He's also the youngest person to receive the Best Actor award at an international film festival. At first, she assumed he'd have a bad attitude, thinking that a perfect person couldn't exist. Yet, he's incredibly sweet. And on top of that, he's so calm, even after such an incident. It was as if he knew something like this would happen. The director inquires if they can continue shooting, considering the tension. He wonders if they should pause for the day, given that the emotional tone was perfect before the incident. However, Lee confidently offers to resume if Jaiwan feels up to it. He's even willing to do the scene alone. The director, surprised, advises him not to push himself, but Lee assures him that he's used to it. Lee's calmness, even in the face of such close calls, has become a trademark of his. This young genius actor, Lee Yanji, who has swept acting awards even before becoming an adult, has a life seemingly full of such misfortunes. Over time, he has learned ways to anticipate and avoid these calamities. Reflecting on his past, he realizes he's been unfortunate since childhood, not only abandoned to an orphanage, but also plagued by countless accidents, even when standing still. Despite this, he never saw himself as unlucky, as he always had friends by his side. But one day, he began to notice that only those close to him got injured. His friends would suffer injuries while playing with him, and girls would gossip, calling him a child of misfortune. The realization hit harder when someone he treasured deeply suffered a serious injury. For the first time, he wondered if he truly was cursed, bringing misfortune to everyone around him. Seeking solace, he confided in a teacher who reassured him, saying it wasn't his fault. Thanks to her compassion, he felt at ease, if only briefly. Even the teacher wasn't spared from misfortune, however, suffering an injury to her leg. She reacted with fear, pushing him away when he offered help, and eventually, she too distanced herself, telling others she was afraid of him. His suspicions became a certainty, and others soon avoided him, fearful of the misfortunes that seemed to follow him. Eventually, his vulnerable expression faded, replaced by a steely resolve and a cold, distant gaze. One day, a boy deliberately knocked his desk over, causing his things to scatter. Some classmates laughed, suggesting he must have done it on purpose. Lee quietly gathered his belongings, used to the whispers and stares. As he reached down, a girl extended her hand to help, a beautiful girl with long hair and dark eyes. She looked directly into his eyes, handed him a pen, and reminded him of an upcoming test. He thanked her, surprised by her kindness. To his amazement, she was unafraid of him. It seemed she either hadn't heard the rumors or simply didn't believe them. Watching her walk away, he thought about how incredible it would be to live freely, without misfortune, even for a day. He wondered what it would feel like to exist without causing harm to those around him, just like that girl. Smiling, he dismissed the thought as impossible. As he moved to leave, he slipped on a loose tile and fell. This wasn't unexpected. He had come to expect these misfortunes. Yet, in that moment of pain, he wondered what would happen if he truly did die here. Perhaps it would be for the best. If he closed his eyes now, all the troubles would vanish. But then, something peculiar happened. His eyes opened, but he couldn't understand why. He felt his arms and legs, realizing he was no longer on the ground. A voice broke through his thoughts, calling him back to reality. It was Park Hae-in, who appeared before him with a dark expression. She seemed disturbed, stating that this was highly unusual. She was certain he should have died. He stared at her in confusion, questioning what she meant by death and fate. Her face twisted in a strange way, and an unsettling mist surrounded her as she declared that she was the one overseeing his fate. She'd been watching him from afar, but he'd altered his path, causing her frustration. She assured him, though, that next time, he wouldn't escape. As she placed 2 fingers on his forehead, memories flooded his mind, scenes of children crying, friends parting, and others suffering, all because of him. Overwhelmed with guilt, tears began to flow, and he lamented. "I shouldn't have done that. I messed everything up." Suddenly, he awoke, body aching and face pale. Believing it was a dream, he glanced around. Later, a doctor informed him that, despite the height from which he fell and the injuries he sustained, his body showed no signs of harm. It was almost miraculous. When everyone left, a woman lingered, asking if he was truly all right as he prepared for discharge. He assures her that it's fine as it doesn't really hurt, and the test results were also fine. However, he is noticeably pale. He explains that he's pale because he had weird dreams. He contemplates the fact that it was just a dream, but wonders why it bothers him so much. He questions if anything happened at the orphanage. She explains that nothing special happened there and asks why he's asking. He responds that it's nothing. Teacher Sae-hyun enters the room and requests to talk to the woman for a minute. Outside, she reveals that she wants Lee to guide Myeonwoo Group's donor. The woman protests, suggesting that since Lee is just getting discharged from the hospital, it's best for him to rest. Wouldn't it be better if they guided the donor instead? Unfortunately, Teacher Sae-hyun reveals that the donor specifically asked for Lee to be their guide, mentioning the donations, making it hard to reject them, as they're in a tight bind. Upon hearing this, Lee becomes pale. This is exactly what he saw in the dream. He realizes that the dream was real. The entity had explained that since he didn't die, it's a future that was created as a result. The orphanage will suffer, and the children who are separated will be raised in much worse conditions, a future where the teachers will blame themselves out of guilt for not being able to protect the children. He, as the source of all these troubles, won't be able to handle it, and will crack under the pressure. All of this, just because he spilled coffee on the donor's pants. The donor is the chairman's youngest son and the director of Myeonwoo Enterprises. Dissatisfied with the incident, he stops all donations. But he couldn't believe that something like this could happen. There's no way the orphanage would collapse just because he spilled some coffee. He'd be right if he was a normal person, but he wonders why so many strange things happen to him. Why does everyone around him seem to get injured, hurt, or end up miserable? It's all very simple. He's bad luck, a huge amount of it on top of that. For him, the probability of something bad happening just from spilling some coffee is 100%. Lee grits his teeth and tells her to stop talking nonsense, insisting that he must have hurt his head when he fell from the roof. Or maybe he's still dreaming. There's no way this is possible. At least, that's what he thought. The entity shrugs and informs him that even if he denies it, what is meant to happen will happen. She questions if he thinks he can avoid fate. But didn't she say it herself, that he lived, even though he was supposed to die? He changed fate. She stares at him, surprised by his reasoning, but then comments that it was just a coincidence with a cute smile on her face. She explains that it's something that's never happened before. He stands up and declares, "You never know unless you try." He's already changed fate once, so he'll do it again. He approaches the teachers and tells them that he'll be the guide for the donor, so they should leave it to him. Meanwhile, the director isn't satisfied. This will be his first public event, yet he's in a horrible mood, believing that his big brother is just making trouble for him. He plans to cut all donations at the first sign of any mistake, but the entity questions if Lee is truly going to change his fate. Many humans have said the same thing, yet in the end, they couldn't change their fate and live their lives as they were. How does one believe happiness and misfortune are created? Humans think these come from relationships, but that's incorrect. It's all because of these things, mediums that contain happiness incidents and misfortune incidents. Unfortunately, he was born with the misfortune medium. All of these red particles, seeming to have a mind of their own, belong to him. Until now, no human has been able to get rid of their misfortune medium, let alone Lee, who has so many. Can he really avoid his misfortunes? Unless he's reborn as another person, he can't avoid them. If he could be someone else, not himself, maybe things would change, so he puts on a cute smile and greets the director, introducing himself. His teacher questions why he's behaving this way all of a sudden, but he ignores her and reveals that he'll be giving the director a tour of the orphanage. He lowers his head and turns to him in advance. The teacher comments that the director can simply follow this kid, but she can go with him if he wishes. Hearing this, the director clicks his tongue and turns away. Lee, knowing himself well, realizes that he would avoid people with such a face, but right now he's not Lee, he's Park Ha-eun, who cannot just sit still in a situation like this. He comments that the director must be tired, as he is a busy person, and since he gave them his precious time, Lee will exclude all the unnecessary parts and guide him with the shortest route quickly. The director declares that this is the most welcoming thing he's heard from all the others. Smirking, he says, "Let's see how fast this kid can wrap things up." The director's assistant is impressed by the boy. As Lee gives the director a tour, a camera records his every action. The director initially thought the children's efforts were childish, then Lee informed him the artwork was created by the children of the orphanage. He also shows the director his study room, which the director comments is terrible. Seeing that everything is going smoothly, the cameraman smiles, telling the secretary that they could end things here. However, they still have time left, though they already have more than enough good footage to use. It's all thanks to the boy. The footage is so high quality there's hardly any to discard. It's even rare for the chairman to see such an expression from director Kim Min-hyuk. That's when the secretary notices that the boy has only been discussing topics that the director enjoys, realizing he's no ordinary child. The secretary informs the director that they could wrap up, but the director is surprised. It doesn't even feel like he's done anything yet. That's when he remembers that the boy had said he'd exclude the unnecessary and guide him efficiently. He wonders if this kid made him feel this way intentionally. Seeing the director's expression, his secretary is horrified. Director Kim questions whether this sick boy lacks pride. He'll never succeed coming from an orphanage, so what's the use in studying? However, Lee responds, explaining that they've never felt hunger here and are raised with love and care. They study and live with dignity, and there's no reason to hear such words. Infuriated, Kim questions if the boy is reprimanding him, shouting, "How dare you talk back? However, Lee lowers his head sadly and thanks the director. Surprised, Kim listens as Lee continues, thanking the director for his support, which has allowed them to live as they do. Kim questions if this was a test, assuming he wanted to see if they were intimidated by their situation. Lee exclaims that it's his dream to become like him, and to do that, he needs to study hard and join a company. Hearing this, the director's ears turn red. He laughs, questioning if Lee thinks he'll become a director just by joining a company. Lee explains that he knows it's a big dream, but it's his goal. The secretary is impressed with how Lee got out of that tight spot so gracefully. Even Director Kim couldn't stay angry at his expression. Director Kim walks away, instructing Lee to guide him so he can rest. Lee talks to himself, reminding himself that he nearly slipped up for a moment. The director warns him not to give up and acknowledges that Lee's talent is evident. In the next scene, the director explains how he became such a big shot. A little more and it'll all be over. Suddenly, the head of the orphanage suggests he drink coffee before leaving. Lee thought it was over even after doing so much. The misfortune was inevitable. If he asked the director to get the coffee himself, he'd say he had no manners, curse him. But if the teacher brought him the coffee herself, she might slip, and it could spill on his pants. He needed to be the one to do it. Maybe it was enough to cover it up with the scores accumulated so far. Unfortunately, he hadn't known him for long, and he couldn't leave the future up to uncertain possibilities. He needed to use a certain method. So, it was best for him to bump into the teacher when she arrived and spill the coffee on himself. If that could stop the misfortune, he would go with it. To his surprise, the teacher brought juice, explaining that the weather was very hot today, so she thought a cold drink would be better. He was stunned, and the director commented that she had good taste in drinks. The director told him to have a drink, too, and wondered why he was just standing there. Meanwhile, Lee pondered what could be happening. The teacher thanked the director for coming, and the director commented that the kid was so cute. If the orphanage needed anything else, they should let management know. He wondered if everything was over, with no incident like this. It seemed that misfortune did not occur. The cameraman inquired if his name was Yanji. The cameraman handed him a business card, asking if Lee had ever thought of becoming a child actor. In the next scene, a woman begged a man to tell her something. Was this really such a hard thing to do? She expressed worry that something could go wrong with the children in her class. However, the man made an irritated expression and declared that she was too noisy. The director exclaimed, "Cut!" and declared that the scene just now was really good. As expected of actor Jung Hyun, there must be a reason why he acts so well. Jung commented that it was all thanks to Johan's directing. That's when the cameraman approached the director, telling him about the extra from episode 1 he mentioned before. He believed he'd found a good child actor. The director had already told him that he would be going scouting himself. The cameraman found it funny since the director had said he liked child actors with raw naturalness. Still, he came to the director despite knowing that this child was still in elementary school and had no experience, yet his image was just perfect. He'd had a hard time finding him, so he wanted the director to take a look. The director commented, wondering how great a child actor could be. However, upon seeing the picture, he ordered the cameraman to bring this child here immediately. Noticing this, Jung was surprised that the director wasn't being stubborn. He wondered what kind of child this could be. Meanwhile, back in the alternate space, the entity inquired, "What's going on? What did you do?" The entity shouted that all his misfortune mediums were gone now. Lee inquired if it was similar to what happened back then, but the entity informed him it was different this time. He escaped death thanks to her. Right before he fell off the roof, his misfortune mediums had been wriggling strangely. That's when the entity had intervened and saved him. Previously, the entity couldn't touch it, but now it could. Since that kind of luck hadn't appeared again, the entity thought it was just nonsense when he said he changed his fate. But when she saw what she saw, she realized she was wrong. He was more than just a human. No, that wasn't the correct word to describe someone like him. He was a misfortune-evading mutant. She questioned what he did, how he shook off all his misfortune. Lee inquired if she remembered what had happened. She explained that it occurred when he was laughing. A human's misfortune medium quantity is usually fixed, so it shouldn't change like that, but strangely, his had disappeared. Lee glanced at his hand and began laughing, commenting that it was a gamble, so he guessed it paid off. The reason for the disappearance was that he became Park Hae-in. She had told him before that he couldn't avoid misfortune unless he was born as a different person. He remembered her words and pretended to be Park Hae-in, thinking that might be the solution. Just from that information, he figured he needed to act like a different person, though that might not necessarily be it. Even before he fell off the roof, he'd been laughing with Hae-in. The entity smiled, commenting that it worked. She jumped in the air, clearly very interested. She asked if he was sure. Lee explained he wasn't sure yet, but earlier, the cameraman suggested he become a child actor. The cameraman explained that he worked as an assistant director at a general production company. He had been busy looking for a child actor recently, but he would make sure it went through perfectly. Although Lee had never done anything like acting before, the cameraman commented that it was actually better that way. The man smiled at him and told him if he was interested, he should give him a call. Lee informed the entity that he received a nice opportunity. Whether it worked or not, he'd only know if he tested it out. Later, the teacher told him it was time for him to come out of his room, and if he didn't, she'd come in. Upon entering his room, she didn't see anyone, but Lee was already on his way to the shoot. Since there would be lots of people and equipment at the shoot, it was the perfect environment for misfortune to happen. However, it was best that he checked it out first. He needed to do it in a way where no one would be harmed. He arrived where the shoot was taking place. A guy bumped into him, and soon the rest of the background cast arrived. Due to the hectic movement of the employees, Lee bumped into a guy and apologized. The guy smiled brightly and questioned if he was the child actor he'd be acting with today. Jung introduced himself as his co-actor. Seeing how chaotic it was, Jung suggested they go inside first. Jung questioned if the boy had come to shoot alone and commented that it was impressive he came alone. Jung asked if he'd ever done a shot like this before. Lee explained that this was his first time, and he wasn't an actor. He was just there because they'd asked him to come. Suddenly, the cameraman arrived and apologized for being late, giving Jung his script and then handing Lee his script. He assured Lee not to feel pressured and to act comfortably. As the reversal nears, Jung rises and glances at Lee, who has a serious expression on his face, as if he's heading into battle. The director introduces himself to the boy. He's heard this is Lee's first shoot and advises him not to be nervous, telling him to loosen up his body as well. A guy can't help but wonder why this director, who usually insists on casting only extras, has had a change of heart in casting a child actor. The cameraman comments that the boy looks great with Jung, noting it's rare to get such a perfect image on set. Yet, observing the boy, he doesn't seem skilled at acting. The cameraman suggests it doesn't really matter whether his acting is great when the director is here to make the scene visually striking. The director explains the scene. It follows an intense moment where the main lead, Ju-won, has a fight with his cherished younger sister. She, now a new teacher, bravely investigates the school's corruption. Knowing the risks, Ju-won tries to stop her, but fails. Amidst this intense situation, a bright child speaks to him, requiring Won to respond harshly, although it's only an act, so the child shouldn't be too scared. Suddenly, Lee smiles broadly and reassures him, saying, "It's okay." Jung is taken aback, as though his world has just shattered from this sudden revelation. The director tells him it's good that he's in a positive mood now and instructs him to wait and stand by. It seems Jung was mistaken in his assumptions, and today's shoot is starting to get a bit more exciting. The scene begins with Jung seated on a bench, a ball in hand. He mutters to himself that he raised his sister well and made her a teacher, but wonders why she keeps digging into situations that are clearly risky. At this moment, Lee approaches, asking if the ball belongs to him. Smiling brightly, Lee laughs, and Jung responds with a stern tone, telling him not to bother him and to go away. The cameraman, who initially chose the boy for his image, is now stunned by his performance. The acting feels natural, perhaps because it's aligned with his personality, and it's more impressive than expected. Lee starts to walk away, prompting Lee to comment that he's a cheapskate, shocking the onlookers. Both the cameraman and the director are surprised, and even Young turns in confusion since this line wasn't in the script. It's clear Lee is entirely immersed in the scene, with his focus solely on Young. This angers Young, who questions whether he's really being called a cheapskate. He asks Lee what he just said, and Lee responds that he simply wants the ball and asks if Young won't give it to him. Young counters, saying that since it's not really his ball, he doesn't want to give it to him in case it gets ruined. Lee puffs out his cheeks, insisting he wouldn't ruin it. He continues, remarking that Young is probably the kind of big brother who wouldn't even lend his game console to his little brother, just like his own big brother who never shares. As Lee reflects on his own experiences with his brother, he concludes that he, too, would only want to use nice things for himself, hence calling Young a cheapskate. Lee then starts babbling, saying that when he's an adult, he'll buy a better game console than his brothers and never lend it to him. Before he regrets it, he suggests Young should let his little brother borrow the console. The director shouts, "Cut!" And Lee, surprised by how deeply he was immersed, realizes he forgot they were filming a drama. The atmosphere is disrupted, but Lee apologizes immediately. However, Young praises him for doing well, lifting him into the air. He even remarks that this boy should really become an actor. The crew, clearly impressed, smooths over the transitions between scenes. Lee hadn't even read the script in advance, yet they could probably wrap up this shoot with just one take. Still, the director requests one more take, wanting a solo cut of the child actor. Young praises Lee as a genius, and the director decides to reach out to his agency right after the shoot. He knows he must show this kid to a writer as soon as possible. Later, as the sun sets and everyone starts talking, Young speaks with Lee and comments that it's really nice, right? They all had fun shooting, and Young admits it was refreshing to act after a while, thanks to Lee. It's a pity, he says, to end the shoot with such a talented young actor so soon. Lee, however, clarifies that he's not actually an actor. Just then, Lee's teacher Sai-hyun arrives, calling for him. Surprised, he pondered why she's here. She explains that she had to come, questioning why he went to the film set alone without a guardian. Lee, in turn, says he didn't think he needed one. Just then, another lady arrives, breathing heavily, and announces that someone named Johan called. Johan wants an additional shoot with Lee for a new scene that wasn't in the script, and the location is a funeral home. Sai-hyun finds it unnerving, and forbids Lee from doing that shoot, yet the other lady reminds her that it's up to Lee to decide. Lee recalls that by participating in the drama, he was testing whether he could escape his misfortune by acting. When he shared this with the entity, she found it amusing. She had told him about the predicted misfortune, but thankfully it didn't occur. This led Lee to feel his test was a success. Remembering Young's words about acting together in the future when he officially becomes an actor, he decides to accept the offer, stating he wants to do it. His teacher gently rubs her head, saying he can do as he wishes, and assures him she'll accompany him to the next shoot. The director chases after Sai-hyun and questions if it's because of where the next shoot will happen. The director reminds her that it's been 7 years. She tells her not to worry, pointing out that Lee has grown up, so he'll be fine. However, she asserts that he's still a middle school student, and expresses the sadness she feels whenever she thinks of that. The kind of pain he's endured doesn't fade over time. At the shoot, the director remarks that Lee's last performance was outstanding. Additionally, the actor had requested the script to be revised to include Lee in another scene. For this scene, Lee needs to tone down his bubbly personality. According to the script, he has to comfort someone, a man who just lost his only family. His teacher, worried, suggests it may be too much, but with determination, Lee assures her he can do it. The director reassures him that he should act as if comforting a friend, not feeling pressured. The filming begins, and Lee declares that his teacher was like his little sibling. Sitting beside him, Lee gently questions if he lent him his game console. Holding back his tears, Lee says, "No," adding an emotional depth that immerses everyone. Only one line remains, but as the camera rolls, Lee pauses, and people wonder why he's not speaking. The teacher, sensing something is wrong, intervenes, asking the director to pause the filming momentarily. The director questions where they're going, and a memory comes to Lee's mind. A feel of dread washes over him. he remembers a boy called Jihyun who died, and a voice saying, "Why did my son have to die?" He remembers Jihyun's parents mourning their loss as he looks at them in the background. His teacher tells him they need to stop the shoot, that there's no need to go through all this trouble. However, he insists it's not a bother. He just lost focus for a moment, but if he goes back, he can do it. She questions why he's lying. Does she think she doesn't know? It's not that he can't concentrate, it's because he keeps thinking about it. He had such a hard time, and she remembers everything. So why does he bother? In a calm voice, he tells her that he still wants to do more, that he has to do it. He thanks his teacher for worrying about him, but it's time to let him go. As he walks away, she watches him with tears in her eyes. Later, he cries and apologizes to Lee, who reminds him, "I told you, it'll be too late to regret it." Tears streaming down his face, the teacher is surprised that he could make such an expression. What could he have been thinking of? The director calls, "Cut!" and says the scene was good. Jung is pleased and comments that Lee is a little genius, mentioning he almost got goosebumps at one point. He wonders when Lee became so good at acting. Lee then approaches his teacher, letting her know they're finished. She embraces him with tears streaming down her face, and as she hugs him tightly, she asks why he's crying. She tells him that seeing him cry makes her sad, even though it was all just acting. She knows, though, that he hasn't cried in 4 years. Even though he's still a child, he doesn't cry or act childish, which she realizes she should have noticed earlier. She feels ashamed that she overlooked it. Reflecting, she thinks back to 4 years ago. It feels like it was just yesterday. The sounds, smells, and memories of that day are still fresh in her mind, just like the scenes today. Saihyun recalls being restrained by 2 doctors and a director, and with tears on her face, she told the director she was scared, begging the director to send Lee away. He lowered his head and told her that everything was in the past, that it was fine now. However, she insists that just because it's all in the past doesn't mean it's easier. She should have told Lee back then that it wasn't his fault. Hearing this for the first time fills him with warmth. She apologizes for the harsh words she once said, for never finding the courage to say sorry until now. She realizes that the expression she used to have whenever she looked at him wasn't one of discomfort. It was something else. He calls her name and reaches out to her, almost making her cry again. She holds his hand and asks if he's hungry. They walk away together, discussing eating chicken. Later that night, they return to the orphanage where the director is waiting. They happily bring chicken for everyone. Seeing them so excited, it's clear they had fun at the shoot. Saihyun comments that Lee's acting is truly impressive, adding that he was so good even the director thought he was an elementary school student until the end of the shoot. Later, the fog comments that the test was a big success because by acting, the misfortune medium seemed to disappear. The fog saw a very pretty light inside the misfortune medium. It was beautiful. She asks if he's happy to have found a way to steer clear of misfortunes. He replies that he'd be happy if he'd known this earlier, then no one would have had to suffer because of him. Just like his birth mother died, he remembers his mother showing him a picture of him, his father, and his mom. When he saw it, he told her that he didn't have a father, but she explained that he did. His father had just left for a while after he was born. He asked where his father went, but she diverted the question and simply played with him. Looking back, he realizes his birth mother loved him, even though they moved from place to place and lived in dormitories. However, because of his misfortune, they were always bound to face hardship, often forced to move or getting kicked out. He knows his mom must have been exhausted, dealing with so much until she eventually left him behind. That was the beginning of watching people suffer because of his misfortunes, and he never wants to see that again. The fog asks if he plans to keep acting from now on, but he says he won't continue. Disappointed, she asks why, and he explains that he doesn't need to go to a film set to imitate others. There's also no need to meet many people, which would only increase the risk of passing his misfortune onto them. He wants to avoid misfortune on his own and live quietly like this. However, just as he says this, a boy appears, staring at him intently. The boy tells him he has important business with him, asking if Lee is the one who acted in the drama at the park the other day. The boy then declares that from this moment on, he wants to be friends. Lee's shocked and silent for a moment. He asks if the boy knows who he is, but the boy quickly says his name. Introducing himself as No Bai-hyuk, he tells Lee he's serious about being friends. Lee doesn't laugh at Bai-hyuk's name, which surprises him. Lee tries to explain that he's not the person he saw at the drama shoot, but the boy interrupts, insisting that he's serious about their friendship. This unexpected encounter leads the boy to believe they're destined to be together as best friends. After that day, Lee's daily life changes completely. He now wakes up an hour and a half earlier to avoid misfortune, becoming a completely different person. Suddenly, his teacher questions why he's awake at such an hour. It's something he can't explain, yet he does it secretly each time. Despite his efforts, he can't believe he got caught by his teacher. Besides this, there are people he keeps contact with regularly, and a friend who insists on following him, which he finds peculiar. Bai-hyuk comments that Lee is always reading a book whenever he finds him, and asks if he likes books more than him. Lee tells him, yes. Bai-hyuk responds, saying he's so mean that he doesn't even care about his healing. The girls comment that Bai-hyuk isn't even in their class, so why is he here? They come to the conclusion that he's obsessed with Lee. The girls are starting to see them in a different light, to the point where Lee seems a bit different, and also, there haven't been any accidents either. They comment that these two kind of look handsome together. Later, Lee tells Bai-hyuk to stop following him, as he's not acting anymore. Bai-hyuk puts his hand on Lee's shoulder and tells him that it doesn't matter, they became best friends, so they should go to the store together, as it's destiny. There's never been any changes, but this isn't so bad. Bai-hyuk questions if Lee likes books more than him. Lee responds, maybe. Lee comments that Bai-hyuk's arm is too heavy, and this leads Bai-hyuk to conclude that he's getting some muscles. However, Lee thinks changes to this extent are okay. Bai-hyuk suggests that they play soccer together after school. However, Lee isn't good at soccer. Suddenly, a bully bumps into him, almost causing him to fall down the stairs, but luckily, Bai-hyuk grabs him and asks if he's okay. Bai-hyuk angrily questions what's wrong with the bully, but the bully declares that he didn't see Lee standing there. He brushes his shoulder off, commenting that he got some of Lee on him. Bai-hyuk is about to beat him up, but Lee tells him to leave it alone, mentioning that this bully has been quiet these days, so why is he acting up again? They begin walking again, and Lee tells Bai-hyuk that he's fine. Compared to when he was suffering from misfortune every day, this is nothing. Suddenly, he slips on a wet floor and begins falling down the stairs. A sense of goosebumps washes over him. It's a horrifying feeling that's so familiar to him. He closes his eyes, bracing for impact. The students gather around him, deciding to call for a teacher. They comment that he must have fainted. He begins waking up and realizes that it doesn't hurt as much as he thought it would, but when he looks up, he sees Bai-hyuk, who threw his body over him to save his life. Lee frantically shakes Bai-hyuk, telling him to open his eyes. This shouldn't have happened. His misfortune has started again. In the other realm, he talks to Fog, explaining that Bai-hyuk got hurt. It's not severe, but he doesn't understand. It was confirmed that he could avoid his misfortune by acting. He tested it by calculating the time every day. Even Fog said he saw the misfortune mediums leave, and he prepared thoroughly this morning too, so why did it return? Fog explains that they're missing something. The more Lee uses that method, the weaker it becomes, starting with the humans closest to him. They'll be affected by his misfortune again. Lee doesn't want to believe this. He wants to believe it's all lies. However, he realizes that the closest person to him right now is Haein, that sweet girl whose smile warms up his life. Later, Lee thinks it's a relief that this beautiful girl is still unharmed. Not long after, though, Haein begins to notice that Lee is following her. She glances at him, he glances at her, and their eyes meet. Lee quickly turns away, and the girls excitedly giggle. The girls come to the conclusion that Lee likes her, but Haein thinks it's not true. That's when Bai-hyuk arrives, commenting that he didn't see her in class, so he wondered where she was. Suddenly, she grabs Bai-hyuk and declares that she's happy he's here. She tells him to do something about his friend quickly, as it's so uncomfortable that she feels like she's dying. Why is he standing over there like that? Lee pretends to be staring at the bulletin board when Bae-hyuk appears and declares that he's upset, which startles Lee. Bae-hyuk explains that he heard Lee's been following Park Hae-in all day, and to make it worse, Lee didn't even come to visit Bae-hyuk at all. He's hurt, both physically and mentally. Lee declares that something's happening right now. Bae-hyuk hugs him even tighter and questions if he doesn't plan on telling him. If that's the case, he won't let him go until he does. Meanwhile, Hae-in tries to convince her friend that it's not like that. Lee thinks that he shouldn't go further away from her, as she could get very hurt. Fogg explains that he couldn't see exactly how Hae-in would get hurt tomorrow, but he did see that she would be bleeding from her eyes, in a lot of pain. This is why Lee can't just stay put and watch again while someone gets hurt because of him. He brushes Bae-hyuk off and apologizes to him, running back to her. Bae-hyuk questions what's wrong. Not too long after, Lee is following Hae-in again. She's tired of him and sighs. She calls his name and questions if he wants to ask or tell her something. Lee scratches his neck and tells her no. She inquires if someone asked him to give her something or if she did something wrong. He tells her it's none of that. Hearing this, she gets angry and questions, really? She walks toward him with anger and questions why he's been following her all day. She even grabs his tie in a rage, telling him to either promise he won't follow her anymore or tell her the reason why he's doing it. Everyone's misunderstanding since he keeps following her. He apologizes to her and declares that he knows she's been very uncomfortable today because of him, but there are things he can't tell her. When he says that, she begins blushing, obviously getting the wrong idea. In a polite manner, he begs her to excuse his actions for today. That's when she starts noticing that he's really tall. Suddenly, she feels a shadow over her head, and she sees a flower pot falling toward her. At that crucial moment, Lee pushes her out of the way, saving her life. She comments that she almost died and wonders why the flower pot fell so suddenly. She realizes that just now, on the roof, there was a person. Lee inquires if she's okay, and she tells him no, but then quickly changes her mind, commenting that she's fine. Lee finds this a relief. She inquires if he's also okay, and he tells her he's good, but she notices his hand is full of splinters from the flower pot. Lee laughs and comments that it's a relief that she's okay. She comments that he's bleeding, but he's still laughing. They should go to the infirmary quickly. Suddenly, a teacher rushes toward them and questions if Hae-in is okay. She declares that she's fine, but that Lee isn't in good shape. With a calm expression, she comments, "It's just Lee again." She tells them both to go to the infirmary first, as she roughly understands the situation. The students begin gossiping, saying there's been an accident, and it's Lee again. "You shouldn't get too close to him." She wonders what's with their reaction, since Lee saved her. She declares that Lee is not at fault, but Lee intervenes and apologizes. She wonders how he can keep such a calm face when he didn't do anything wrong. In the other realm, Fogg questions if his hand is still hurting. Fogg has been watching him since earlier. Lee tells Fogg that he's fine, but if that's the case, why is he moving around like this on such a joyous day? Today is the day his drama airs for the first time. He's been waiting for a long while to be able to watch it with him. He ponders if Fogg would seriously just use magic just to watch the show, but he can't believe how comfortable he feels right now, even after being in a mess just now. However, this comfort will also disappear once he opens his eyes. Thankfully, he was able to stop Hae-in's misfortune, but people will continue to get hurt because of him. It has always been like this. He's been so excited lately, but he should go back to how he was before. He has to keep his distance from everyone. Upon opening the door, everyone stares at him. The atmosphere really feels different from usual. Bae-hyuk calls out, "The genius actor Lee has entered." He is shocked and questions what his friend is talking about, but before he can react, he is swarmed by a group of girls. They all inquire if he was an actor since when, and if he's close with Young, as Young had uploaded a photo of him on IG. Bae-hyuk mentions the reaction the video got and says they're no joke. Lee sits down and comments that he's not that amazing. He wasn't even in many scenes. However, Hae-in comments that he is amazing. He turned everything upside down. She then begins listing all the things she finds cute about him, even though he's usually quiet, and more. She questions what he thinks of himself. He didn't brag about saving her and even got criticized for nothing. He's good at what he does, so he should compliment himself. His classmates agree. They didn't even realize it was Lee when they first saw the yellow-haired kid, as he looked so different from his usual self. Even some of their sisters have been searching for Lee all day long. The funeral scene was incredible. This is a great moment for Lee, but what should he do? He didn't expect something like this to happen, and if not this, it will be difficult to keep his distance from everyone. Just then, he received a phone call. He wonders why all these embarrassing things seem to happen at once. In the next scene, we see him enjoying chocolate with his favorite big brother, Young, who tells him to eat as much as he likes. Young explains it's a thank you gesture for causing such a buzz around the drama. Young feeds him, and he wonders if that's really all this is. He makes a cute expression but has a feeling Young is trying to be serious. Young laughs and admits that he actually wanted to tell him something. He asks if Lee would like to learn acting from him. Watching Lee perform, he could tell he had a talent for it, and it would be a waste not to nurture that talent. Young wants to see him acting for a long, long time. However, Lee lowers his head and apologizes to Young, saying he doesn't want to act. Earlier, he'd found out that the next person to be affected by his misfortune is none other than the actor Lee Yoon-hyun. Lee questions why, as they haven't even been meeting as much these days. Hyun doesn't know why either. He only saw the flow of misfortune mediums. There might be a fateful connection between them. This time, however, it's quite severe. Young's face would be terribly burned. This would be a terrible fate for an actor. His handsome appearance is incredibly important. Even people who don't watch TV know that. He could have become an even more incredible actor, but misfortune looms over him because of Lee. His career will be ruined because of him, and Lee can't let that happen. That's why he has to cut ties. As long as he stays close to him, misfortune will continue to loom over Young. Young comments that he's surprised Lee doesn't like acting, as he thought he enjoyed it. Lee replies that he must have misunderstood. He only appeared in Tale because he was curious about drama shoots. After trying it, he doesn't think his acting skills are up to par and felt he was just imitating someone else. Young asks if acting just seems like imitation